Bullies don't know black, class loser, is now a billionaire, invite him to the reunion just to laugh. Why did his former classmates believe they could still humiliate the person they once mocked? What would happen when they discovered the man entering the reunion was now wealthier than everyone there? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Afterglow Reckoning Tales, where old wounds, hidden success, and breathtaking reversals take center stage. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another dramatic story. Thank you for every view, thoughtful comment, and moment you spend watching with us. Your support allows our storytelling community to continue growing and reaching audiences everywhere. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there right now. We truly appreciate you joining us today. Now, settle in, follow every reaction carefully, and let us enter the opening scene of today's unforgettable story. Guys, imagine if Marcus Williams actually showed up tonight. The whole room would finally get the joke we've been waiting 20 years to tell. Derek Whitmore's voice echoed through the private event room of the Grand Oak Country Club, surrounded by old classmates, expensive suits, and glasses raised in celebration. The reunion wasn't supposed to be about memories. Not really. It was supposed to be about one person. Marcus Williams. The name alone brought smiles to faces that hadn't thought about him in decades. Wait, you really invited him? One former classmate laughed, leaning back in his chair. The same Marcus from senior year? Derek grinned. Of course I did. I thought everyone deserved one last laugh. The room filled with quiet chuckles. They remembered Marcus differently. Not as the man he would become. They remembered the teenager who sat alone during lunch because nobody wanted to sit beside him. The kid who wore the same two jackets throughout winter. The quiet black student who always carried books but rarely spoke unless a teacher called on him. To them, Marcus Williams was the definition of a failure before his life had even started. A boy who didn't belong. A boy who would never make it out. Derek still remembered standing in the hallway 20 years earlier, surrounded by teammates and friends, pointing at Marcus while everyone laughed. You really think you're going somewhere with those little science projects? Those words had followed Marcus for years. But Derek never knew what happened after that. He never knew that the same boy they mocked went home every night and built ideas while everyone else chased popularity. He never knew that the teenager they called the class loser would one day create technology used around the world. And he definitely never knew that the man he invited back to embarrass was now a billionaire. Across the city, inside a quiet office overlooking the skyline, Marcus Williams stared at the invitation sitting on his desk. The reunion. 20 years. A room full of people who remembered his failures but knew nothing about his journey. His assistant, Rachel Carter, stood nearby and watched his expression carefully. You don't have to go, she said softly. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Outside the glass windows, the city moved beneath him. Millions of people rushing toward their futures, unaware of the battles that shaped the people around them. Finally, Marcus picked up the invitation. I'm not going for them, he said. Rachel looked at him. Then why go? Marcus looked down at the old class photo attached to the invitation. A younger version of himself stared back. A teenager who had no idea what was waiting ahead. I want to see something, he said quietly. What? Whether people change, or whether they just get better at hiding who they are. 20 years earlier, Marcus walked through those school hallways feeling invisible. Tonight, he would walk back through a different door. But the people waiting inside still saw the same kid. They didn't see the founder. They didn't see the billionaire. They didn't see the man who built an empire from every insult they gave him. They only saw Marcus Williams. The boy they thought they defeated. And that was their biggest mistake. Because sometimes the person everyone laughs at in the beginning, is the person everyone has to respect. In the end. And tonight, the laughter was about to stop. The funny thing about people who laugh at your past, is they never imagine they might be standing next to your future. The sentence had not been spoken yet. But Marcus Williams could already feel it waiting for him. 20 years ago, he walked through the halls of Westbridge High School with his head lowered, carrying books that were heavier than his backpack. Tonight, he walked through the glass doors of the Grand Oak Country Club with the same quiet expression. The difference was everything that had happened in between. The entrance hall was filled with familiar faces. Old classmates dressed in expensive suits and elegant dresses, laughing beneath golden lights and crystal chandeliers. A room built to celebrate memories. But Marcus knew some memories were only beautiful to the people who caused the pain. He stepped forward slowly. No security team. No assistants. No announcement. Just Marcus Williams wearing a simple dark blazer, clean shoes, and the same calm eyes that had survived every insult thrown at him. For a moment, nobody recognized him. Then a voice cut through the room. "Wait!" Derek Whitmore stopped mid-conversation. His smile faded into confusion. "Marcus?" The room shifted. People turned. Whispers started spreading across the crowd like a quiet storm. "No way, is that really him? I haven't seen him since graduation." Derek looked Marcus up and down, searching for the version of him he remembered. The poor kid. The quiet kid. The one nobody expected to succeed. A slow grin appeared on Derek's face. "Well, I'll be honest," Derek said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I didn't think you would actually come." A few people laughed. Not loudly. Not yet. But enough. Enough for Marcus to recognize the sound. The same sound from the hallway. The same sound from the cafeteria. The same sound from 20 years ago. Marcus didn't react. He simply looked around the room. Some faces had changed. Some had not. The same people who once ignored him were now curious. The same people who once judged him were now studying him. Derek stepped closer, holding a drink in his hand. "You know, we're just talking about old times," he said. "Everyone remembers you." Marcus smiled slightly. "Do they?" Derek laughed. "Of course. You were unforgettable." The words sounded friendly. But the meaning behind them was clear. Everyone in the room understood. Derek wasn't welcoming Marcus. He was reopening an old wound. A woman standing nearby named Emily Carter watched silently. She had been one of the only people who ever defended Marcus in school. She remembered something everyone else forgot. Marcus was never a loser. He was just surrounded by people who couldn't see his potential. "Marcus," Emily said warmly, stepping forward. "It's been a long time." For the first time that night, someone smiled at him without hidden intentions. "Good to see you, Emily," Marcus replied. Derek glanced between them. "So what have you been doing all these years?" he asked. The question sounded harmless. But everyone heard the challenge underneath. Because Derek expected a small answer. A normal job. A quiet life. Proof that his old judgment had been correct. Marcus looked toward the crowd. 20 years of memories moved through his mind. The jokes. The names. The moments when people decided his future before he ever had the chance to create it. Then he answered calmly. "I've been building." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Building what?" Marcus looked at him. "Things that last." A few people exchanged confused looks. Derek laughed again. "Still mysterious, huh? Some things never change." But Derek didn't notice something important. The room had become quieter. People were listening now. Because there was something different about Marcus. The boy they remembered always looked like he was trying to prove he belonged. The man standing in front of them looked like he already knew he did. And that difference made people uncomfortable. Because confidence without explanation is powerful. Marcus walked deeper into the reunion. Every step carried the weight of the past. But he wasn't walking in as the boy they mocked. He was walking in as the man they never expected. And the people waiting to laugh had no idea they were about to become the story everyone remembered. The cruelest thing about people who mock your struggles is that they never imagine those struggles are the foundation of your success. The laughter inside the Grand Oak Country Club grew louder. At first, it was just a few quiet jokes. Then it became a performance. Derek Whitmore stood near the center of the reunion room, surrounded by former classmates who were enjoying the comfort of old memories and the safety of a crowd. He held a glass in one hand and a phone in the other. "All right, everyone," Derek announced with a smile. "I found something you're going to love." The large screen behind him flickered on. And there he was. Marcus Williams. 17 years old. Standing in an old school hallway with a backpack over one shoulder and a nervous expression on his face. The room reacted instantly. Some laughed. Some whispered. Some looked away uncomfortably. Because everyone knew exactly what Derek was doing. He wasn't sharing a memory. He was reopening a wound. "Look at him," Derek said, laughing. Marcus always looked like he was about to apologize for taking up space. A few people laughed harder. Marcus stood near the back of the room, watching silently. The image on the screen wasn't just a photograph. It was a moment frozen in time. A reminder of every assumption people had made about him. Derek continued. "Remember when he told everyone he was going to build something big?" He shook his head dramatically. We all thought he was joking. The room laughed again. But this time, not everyone joined. Emily Carter watched Marcus carefully. She noticed something different. The old Marcus would have looked down. The old Marcus would have tried to disappear. But this Marcus? He stood completely still. Like the words were passing through him instead of breaking him. Derek noticed the silence from a few people and smiled. "Come on, guys. We're just having fun." That sentence. Those exact words. Marcus had heard them before. 20 years ago. Every insult had ended the same way. "It's just a joke." Every cruel comment. "It's just teasing." Every moment of humiliation. "It's not that serious." But Marcus knew something they didn't. A joke repeated enough times becomes a message. And the message he received as a teenager was simple. You don't belong. The screen changed again. Another picture appeared. Marcus sitting alone during lunch. A young black teenager surrounded by empty seats. The room became quieter. Even some of Derek's friends started shifting uncomfortably. Because seeing it on a screen was different. The memories were no longer abstract. They were real. Derek laughed nervously. "Okay, maybe we went a little hard on him back then." He looked toward Marcus. "But hey, you survived, right?" Marcus finally moved. Slowly. He stepped forward. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward him. For a second, everyone expected anger. A speech. A confrontation. Something emotional. But Marcus simply looked at the screen. Then he looked back at Derek. "You remember a lot about me," Marcus said calmly. Derek smiled. "Of course. We all do." Marcus nodded. "That's interesting." A pause. "Because you remember the moments when I struggled." The room became still. "But you never wondered what I was doing while you were laughing." Nobody spoke. The confidence in Derek's smile weakened slightly. Because Marcus wasn't fighting back. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was simply stating a fact. Emily looked around the room. She could feel the atmosphere changing. The people who came here expecting entertainment were beginning to realize something. They weren't watching a reunion anymore. They were watching a reckoning. Derek cleared his throat. "Marcus, don't make this dramatic. We were kids." Marcus looked at him. "Yes." A brief silence. "We were." Then Marcus glanced back at the picture of his younger self. "But only one of us carried those moments into adulthood." The words landed heavier than any insult. Because everyone understood. Derek thought he was bringing back the past to make Marcus feel small. But he had accidentally reminded the entire room of what Marcus had overcome. And they still didn't know the truth. They still didn't know who Marcus Williams had become. They still thought they were laughing at the same boy from 20 years ago. They had no idea that the person standing quietly in front of them was the same person investors, executives, and entire industries now listened to. And the biggest mistake they made that night was assuming the quietest person in the room had the least power. Sometimes the person who remembers your pain is the only person who can see your strength before the world finally notices it. The room had changed. Minutes earlier, the reunion was filled with laughter. Now, it was filled with silence. The old photographs still remained on the screen behind Derek Whitmore, but they no longer looked like entertainment. They looked like evidence. Evidence of a time when Marcus Williams was judged before anyone ever tried to understand him. Marcus stood near the center of the room, calm and composed. No anger. No bitterness. Just a quiet confidence that made everyone uncomfortable. Because the people who expected him to break were now watching him stand taller than ever. Derek noticed the change in the atmosphere. He looked around and realized the room was no longer following his lead. The attention had shifted. "So," Derek said, forcing a laugh, "I guess Marcus has become serious over the years." A few people smiled nervously. But nobody laughed like before. Then Emily Carter stepped forward. "Actually, Derek," she said, "maybe we should talk about what really happened." The room became still. Derek looked at her. "What do you mean?" Emily looked at the screen displaying the younger Marcus. "I mean, everyone remembers the pictures. Everyone remembers the jokes." She paused. But almost nobody remembers why Marcus was always quiet. Marcus looked at Emily. For the first time that night, there was a small expression of surprise on his face. Because he didn't expect anyone to remember. Emily continued. Marcus wasn't quiet because he was weak. Her voice became stronger. He was quiet because he was trying to survive. The words landed heavily. The room listened. 20 years earlier, Emily had been one of the few people who noticed what others ignored. She remembered Marcus staying late after school, working in the computer lab while everyone else went home. She remembered him carrying broken electronics because he wanted to understand how they worked. She remembered him talking about creating something that could help people. But nobody cared. Because they were too focused on what they saw. Old clothes. A quiet personality. A black kid from a neighborhood they looked down on. They had already decided his story before he ever had the chance to write it. "Do you remember the science competition?" Emily asked Derek. Derek's smile faded. "That was a long time ago." "Yes," Emily replied. "It was." Her eyes moved around the room. But some things from that day never really left. Marcus remembered. Everyone had forgotten the details. But he hadn't. He remembered standing in front of the school with his project. A device he built from old computer parts. Something he spent months creating. Then came the accusations. The rumors. The whispers. People saying someone like him couldn't have created something that advanced. Instead of asking how he built it, they asked who helped him. That was the moment Marcus learned something painful. Sometimes people don't doubt your ability because of what you can't do. They doubt you because they already decided what someone like you is allowed to achieve. Back in the reunion room, Emily looked directly at Marcus. You deserved better than what happened here. Marcus remained silent. For years, he imagined this moment. A chance to explain. A chance to tell everyone how much their words affected him. But standing there now, he realized something. He didn't need their approval anymore. Derek crossed his arms. So what? We were teenagers. Marcus finally looked at him. Yes. A pause. We were. Then he added softly, but teenagers become adults. The room became even quieter. And adults have a choice. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because everyone knew what Marcus meant. The reunion wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about recognizing that the people they laughed at were still carrying dreams they never understood. Derek looked away. For the first time that evening, he didn't know what to say. And across the room, several classmates began seeing Marcus differently. Not as the kid from the old photographs. Not as the person they remembered failing. But as someone who had survived. Everything they thought would destroy him. Emily walked closer. So, Marcus, she said gently, what have you really been building all these years? A small smile appeared on his face. The kind of smile that suggested there was a story nobody in that room was prepared to hear. I'll show you, Marcus said. And at that moment, everyone felt it. Something was coming. The man they invited back to laugh at, was about to reveal why the world had been paying attention to him all along. Before the world knew his name, Marcus Williams was just a kid sitting in a small bedroom, surrounded by broken machines and impossible dreams. The reunion room was still waiting for answers. Everyone had heard Marcus say the words. I've been building. But nobody understood what those words truly meant. To them, building was a simple phrase. A career. A hobby. Maybe a small business. They had no idea that those two words carried 20 years of sacrifice, rejection, and determination. Marcus looked across the room. At the faces of people who remembered his failures more clearly than his dreams. Then, for a moment, his mind returned to a different place. A small apartment on the edge of the city. 20 years earlier. A younger Marcus sat on the floor of his bedroom, surrounded by old computer parts, wires, and broken electronics. The room was small. The furniture was old. But his imagination was bigger than the space around him. Every night after school, Marcus worked on his inventions until the early hours of the morning. Not because he wanted attention. Not because he wanted to prove anyone wrong. But because creating was the one place where nobody could tell him what he was capable of. His mother, Angela Williams, would often stand at the doorway and watch him. Marcus, she said one night, you know you don't have to carry the whole world on your shoulders. The teenage boy looked up from his project. I'm not carrying the world, Mom. He smiled slightly. I'm just trying to make my place in it. Those words stayed with him. Because outside that room, the world had already decided who Marcus was. A poor kid. A quiet kid. A black kid who was expected to struggle. Teachers underestimated him. Students mocked him. People saw his circumstances and assumed they knew his future. But they never saw the hours. The failures. The nights when his inventions didn't work. The mornings when he showed up tired but still refused to quit. Back in the reunion room, Marcus slowly looked at the old picture on the screen. The teenager in that photo looked different. Not because he was weaker. Because he was still becoming. Derek watched him carefully. For the first time that night, Derek seemed uncertain. Because he was beginning to understand something. Marcus wasn't embarrassed by his past. He respected it. You know, Marcus said quietly, there was a time when I believed everything people said about me. The room listened. I believed maybe they were right. A few classmates lowered their eyes. Because everyone remembered the moments they chose not to defend him. Marcus continued. When people constantly tell you that you don't belong, eventually you start wondering if they're seeing something you can't. Emily listened closely. She knew this was the part nobody ever heard. The part behind the success. The part behind the billionaire. The difference was, Marcus said, I had someone who reminded me that my situation was temporary. His mother's voice came back to him. The nights she encouraged him. The mornings she pushed him forward. The moments when failure felt permanent, but she reminded him that failure was only a chapter. Not the entire story. Derek crossed his arms. So all of this came from being bullied? Marcus looked at him. No, a pause. All of this came from refusing to let people who didn't know me decide who I could become. The room went silent. Because that answer was different from what Derek expected. He expected anger. He expected revenge. Instead, Marcus gave them something much harder to ignore. Growth. Years ago, they laughed because they thought Marcus had nothing. They never realized he had something more valuable than popularity. He had purpose. And purpose survives things money cannot. Emily smiled softly. I always knew you were different, Marcus. He nodded. Most people didn't. A small silence followed. Then Marcus looked toward the entrance of the room. I think it's time you all saw what I've been building. Nobody knew what that meant. Nobody knew what was coming. But one thing had changed. The room that once gathered to laugh at Marcus Williams was now waiting to hear his story. And the next few minutes would reveal the truth they never imagined. The boy they underestimated had built something far greater than anyone in that room could understand. The moment everyone in the room realized they were not laughing at a failure, but standing in front of a man who changed an entire industry. Marcus Williams reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The room watched carefully. Derek Whitmore smiled slightly, still trying to convince himself that nothing had changed. Maybe Marcus had a successful job. Maybe he had a decent life. But Derek still believed he understood the story. Because Derek only knew the version of Marcus that existed 20 years ago. The version who sat alone. The version who stayed quiet. The version everyone underestimated. Marcus opened an email and turned the screen toward Emily. Can you connect this to the display? Emily looked confused. Sure. A few seconds later, the large screen behind them changed. The old school photographs disappeared. The memories of humiliation faded away. And a new image appeared. A company logo. A name. Williams Quantum Technologies. The room became silent. Nobody recognized it at first. Then one person whispered. Wait, another person leaned forward. I've heard of that company. Marcus stood calmly as the screen displayed images of advanced technology, global partnerships, and innovation projects. Derek looked at the screen. Then back at Marcus. What is this? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Because he knew something. The truth was more powerful when people discovered it themselves. A man across the room took out his phone. He searched the company name. His expression changed instantly. No way, everyone looked at him. What? He slowly raised his eyes. Marcus, his voice became quieter. You're the founder? The room froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Because the name they had spent years ignoring was suddenly connected to something they all recognized. A company valued at billions. A company mentioned in business magazines. A company whose technology was being used by organizations around the world. Derek stared at Marcus. That's impossible. Marcus looked at him. Why? Derek struggled to answer. Because the real reason was something he didn't want to admit. It wasn't impossible because Marcus lacked intelligence. It was impossible because Derek had never allowed himself to imagine Marcus succeeding. The room began searching. Phones appeared everywhere. People who once searched Marcus's name to find nothing were now discovering a completely different person. Founder. CEO. Investor. Billionaire. Every title told a story they never knew. Emily smiled quietly. I knew you were building something. Marcus looked at her. Most people didn't. The words were simple. But they carried the weight of years. Derek stepped closer to the screen. So all this time, he stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. Because he was finally seeing the truth. The kid he mocked wasn't lucky. He wasn't given success. He created it. Every failure. Every rejection. Every moment when someone told him he didn't belong. It all became fuel. Marcus looked around the room. I didn't show this because I wanted anyone here to feel small. Everyone listened. I showed this because people often decide someone's value before they ever learn their story. The room became quiet again. No laughter. No jokes. No confident voices from the past. Only reflection. Derek looked uncomfortable. For years, he had believed popularity was power. He believed being admired in high school meant winning. But standing there, looking at Marcus, he finally understood the difference. Attention fades. Character remains. Marcus continued. The same person you laughed at 20 years ago was still working. A pause. Still learning. Another pause. Still believing. Nobody spoke. Because every person in that room knew they had witnessed something they would remember forever. The reunion they planned as a joke had become something completely different. The person they invited back to embarrass had become the person everyone wanted to understand. And Derek Whitmore, the man who once stood at the center of every crowd, was now standing silently beside the success story he never saw coming. The room had entered expecting to celebrate the past. Instead, they were forced to confront it. And the truth was finally impossible to ignore. Marcus Williams was never the loser they believed him to be. He was the future they failed to recognize. The most powerful moment is not when the person who hurt you finally loses, it is when they realize they were wrong about you all along. The room inside the Grand Oak Country Club felt completely different now. The same people who arrived expecting a comedy show were now standing in silence. The same people who once laughed at Marcus Williams were now looking at him with a mixture of disbelief, regret, and admiration. But Marcus did not look at them like enemies. He looked at them like people who had never understood his story. Derek Whitmore remained frozen near the screen. The company logo was still displayed behind Marcus. Williams Quantum Technologies. A name that represented billions of dollars. A name that represented innovation. A name that represented the future. And somehow, it belonged to the same person Derek once called a failure. That doesn't make sense, Derek finally said. His voice was quieter now. Not confident. Not arrogant. Just confused. Marcus looked at him. What doesn't make sense? Derek glanced around the room. You. A pause. All these years, everyone thought, he stopped. Because saying the words out loud would reveal the truth. Everyone thought Marcus would never become anything. Marcus nodded slowly. And that was the problem. The room listened. Everyone thought they knew my story before I had the chance to finish writing it. Those words stayed in the air. Because every person in that room understood what he meant. They had judged a teenager based on his circumstances. They saw his clothes, his neighborhood, his silence. And they believed those things represented his future. But they were wrong. Marcus walked toward the screen displaying the achievements of his company. When I was 17 years old, people looked at me and saw limitations. He paused. They didn't see curiosity. Another pause. They didn't see determination. His eyes moved across the room. And they definitely didn't see potential. Emily watched him carefully. She knew this moment wasn't about proving he was successful. Marcus had already done that. This was about something deeper. It was about every person who had ever been underestimated. Every person who had been told they didn't belong. Every person who had been judged before they were understood. Derek lowered his voice. So what now? Marcus looked at him. What do you mean? Derek looked uncomfortable. You came here. You showed everyone this. He pointed toward the screen. Was this the plan? To embarrass us? For the first time that evening, Marcus smiled. Not a proud smile. Not a victorious smile. A disappointed one. No, the answer surprised everyone. No? Marcus shook his head. If I wanted revenge, I wouldn't need a reunion. The room became silent. Success was never about proving you were wrong. He looked around. Success was about proving to myself that your opinions were never my identity. The words hit harder than any insult. Because Marcus wasn't trying to destroy anyone. He was showing them something they had forgotten. A person's value does not disappear because others refuse to see it. Derek looked down. For years, he believed Marcus's silence meant weakness. Now he understood. It was discipline. It was patience. It was someone building quietly while everyone else was busy judging loudly. One former classmate stepped forward. Marcus, the man hesitated. I owe you an apology. Another person nodded. Me too. Slowly, the room began changing. Not because Marcus demanded it. Not because he humiliated them. But because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. The boy they laughed at had become the man they respected. And the person they thought needed their approval, had built a life without ever needing it. Marcus looked around one final time. 20 years ago, he walked through those same people feeling invisible. Tonight, he stood in front of them completely seen. But the most powerful part was this: he didn't need them to finally recognize his worth. He already knew it. And that was the lesson they would remember long after the reunion ended. The man they invited back to laugh at, was the man who taught them what true success looked like. The greatest victory is not making the people who doubted you feel small, it is showing them that their judgment was never powerful enough to define you. The reunion continued, but the energy inside the room had completely transformed. The same walls that once carried laughter now carried reflection. The same people who arrived ready to celebrate old memories were now forced to confront old mistakes. Marcus Williams stood quietly near the screen, watching everyone process the truth. For years, these people had only known one version of him. The teenager who struggled. The student who sat alone. The person they believed would never escape the life they imagined for him. But they never knew the battles he fought after leaving those school hallways. They never knew about the rejection letters. The failed inventions. The moments when success felt impossible. They only saw the final chapter. They never saw the pages before it. Derek Whitmore looked at Marcus differently now. Not with the confidence of someone looking down. But with the uncertainty of someone realizing he had been wrong for a very long time. You know, Derek said quietly, I always thought you disappeared because you couldn't handle this place. Marcus looked at him. The sentence carried years of misunderstanding. Years of assumptions. Years of believing Marcus left because he lost. But Marcus knew the truth. He didn't leave because he was defeated. He left because he had something bigger to build. I didn't disappear, Marcus said. A pause. I was preparing. Nobody spoke. Because that was the difference between them. While others were trying to become popular, Marcus was trying to become capable. While others were trying to impress people, Marcus was trying to create something meaningful. Derek looked down. I guess we never really knew you. Marcus nodded. No, his voice remained calm. You knew the version of me that you created. The word struck everyone. Because they were true. They didn't see Marcus. They saw their own assumptions. They saw a black teenager from a background they underestimated. They saw someone quiet and decided he had nothing to say. They saw someone different and decided he didn't belong. But Marcus was never defined by what they saw. He was defined by what he continued to do when nobody was watching. Emily stepped closer. Marcus, after everything that happened here, why come back? The room waited for the answer. Because everyone wondered the same thing. A billionaire CEO. A man with unlimited opportunities. Why return to the place where people once made him feel worthless? Marcus looked around. At the old classmates. At the faces from his past. Then he answered. Because I wanted to know if people had changed. A quiet moment passed. And I wanted to remind myself that I had. Those words carried something deeper. Marcus didn't return because he needed an apology. He didn't return because he needed acceptance. He returned because sometimes you have to revisit the places that hurt you to realize they no longer have power over you. Derek swallowed. I'm sorry, Marcus. The apology came slowly. Almost painfully. Because admitting he was wrong meant letting go of the person he thought he was. The confident athlete. The popular student. The person who always believed he was above others. Marcus looked at him. For a moment, the entire room waited. Would he accept? Would he reject? Would he finally say everything he had held inside for 20 years? But Marcus simply nodded. Thank you. Derek looked surprised. That's it? Marcus smiled slightly. What else should it be? A silence followed. Your apology doesn't change my past. He paused. But it can change your future. The room became still. Because that was Marcus's true victory. Not making Derek suffer. Not embarrassing him. Not proving he was better. The real victory was refusing to become the same person who once hurt him. Marcus had every reason to be bitter. But he chose wisdom. He chose growth. He chose peace. And in that moment, everyone understood something important. The boy they tried to break had become a man they could never control. The billionaire reveal was not the most powerful part of Marcus Williams' story. The most powerful part was that after everything they did, he still became someone better than they expected. And that was something no one in the room could ever take away from him. 20 years ago, they laughed when Marcus Williams walked into the room. Tonight, they stood in silence as they realized the person they underestimated had become the person they could never ignore. The reunion slowly came to an end. The music continued playing softly in the background. The lights remained warm. The tables were still filled with unfinished conversations. But something had changed forever. Because nobody in that room would ever look at Marcus Williams the same way again. The old photographs were gone from the screen. The jokes had disappeared. The confidence Derek Whitmore carried when the night began was replaced by something completely different. Reflection. For years, Derek believed he had won. He believed being popular in high school meant being successful. He believed being respected by the crowd meant having power. But 20 years later, standing in front of Marcus, he finally understood the truth. Attention is temporary. Character is permanent. Marcus stood near the entrance, preparing to leave. The same man who arrived quietly. The same man who entered a room full of people who once made him feel invisible. But now, everyone saw him. Not because of his wealth. Not because of his company. Not because of the billions attached to his name. They saw him because they finally understood his journey. Emily walked toward him. "You know," she said, smiling, "I always wondered what happened to that kid who stayed after school every day." Marcus smiled. "He kept going." Emily nodded. "That sounds like you." Marcus looked back at the room one last time. At the people who once defined him by his struggles. At the people who now knew his strength came from those struggles. "I used to think I needed to prove them wrong," Marcus said. Emily listened. "But eventually, I realized something." He paused. "I didn't build my life because they doubted me." A small smile appeared on his face. "I built it because I believed in myself." Those words carried the true meaning of his success. Marcus didn't become a billionaire because he wanted revenge. He didn't become a leader because he wanted to silence his critics. He became successful because he refused to let someone else's opinion become his identity. Behind every achievement was a story nobody saw. The late nights. The failures. The moments when quitting would have been easier. The times when the world looked at him and saw limitations. But Marcus looked at himself and saw possibilities. As he walked toward the exit, Derek followed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Derek stopped. "Marcus." Marcus turned around. Derek looked different now. Not like the person who stood in the center of the room making jokes. But like someone finally facing the truth. "I really was wrong about you." Marcus looked at him. "Yes." Derek took a breath. "I should have seen it back then." Marcus nodded. "Maybe." A quiet moment passed. But people can only see what they are willing to see. Derek lowered his eyes. Those words were not an attack. They were a lesson. Because Marcus wasn't interested in making Derek feel the same pain he once felt. He had already moved beyond that. The person Derek tried to embarrass had become someone who no longer needed to compete with him. And that was the greatest victory. Outside the building, Marcus stepped into the night air. The city lights reflected across the streets. Years ago, he walked through those same emotions feeling small. Tonight, he walked away knowing exactly who he was. A son. A leader. A creator. A man who transformed every obstacle into a foundation. The story people remembered from high school was not the story Marcus lived. They remembered the boy who struggled. The world knew the man who succeeded. And that was the final lesson Marcus Williams left behind: never judge someone by the chapter you entered. Because the person you underestimate today may be the person changing the world tomorrow. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who has been building the greatest future all along.